This is NDTV, and you're watching Classics.
As India turns 65, we found an interesting way to capture the complexity and chaos of the past 6.5 decades through the lens of Indian photojournalists from the 1940s to the present. The breadth of the work is far too large to distill, so we've asked photojournalists to identify 2 images which they feel are iconic to them personally and to the life of the nation. In no way is this a complete list of eminent photojournalists, nor indeed of every defining moment in our recent history. But there's enough here to bring to life our rich tradition of photography and a country that's given us 6.5 decades of visual drama.
He was quite involved with Gandhiji. After every shoot, he would go and leave some money for Gandhiji in his fund. You know, Gandhiji used to expect photographers to pay for all the pictures. He used to tell them, you know, you're going to make money out of my pictures. Mera paisa kahan hai? He used to always tell us, like, you know, I used to always contribute. Ek naya paisa, ek aana, do aana.
Advertising photographer Aditya Arya recalls the life and times of one of India's earliest and most prolific photojournalists, Kulwant Roy. Roy first learned photography in the 1930s from Aditya's maternal uncles in Lahore. Partition forced him to relocate to Delhi, where he plunged into full-time photojournalism. He remained a bachelor and left his work to Aditya's family.
This is an amazing story by itself. In 1965, he was one of the few photojournalists. He was number 22 on the list of PIB. So he's left all these PIB invites in an envelope
Aditya has now worked passionately to create the Kulwant Roy archives.
The only surviving negative in the world of signing of the Indian Constitution. The original negatives got spoiled, and that's the original envelope in which he has written the note. And I was lucky that he had made a contact print of that negative and left it.
So Aditya, we wanted you to identify 2 images from your archive of Kulwant Roy.
This is one of them, his visit to Bhakra Dam, when he wanted to do a story on the so-called temples of modern India, which Nehruji was talking about, and this was one of the biggest, largest public project of its kind. This is purely a graphic image. You know, he's conveyed this idea of construction, building, activity. Look at the steel, look at the power, look at the figures.
The second iconic image that you have for us.
That's this. Nehruji, Gandhiji and Patel in some deep conspiracy just before freedom. You see this, it says Gulami, and you see the map of India and the shackles just breaking. So that is so iconic.
So we're just on the cusp of being free.
You know, we are about to be free. Hey, what are we getting into? You know, this is that kind of picture. This newspaper doesn't exist anymore, Sunday Hindustan Standard. But I believe, I've checked up the records.
This is an earlier photograph though, it's from 46. 46,
but then he gets an award for actually taking this picture in 1950.
This is at partition, refugees from East Bengal crossing over into the West Bengal side at night. These were famous pictures from the Bengal famine in 1943. These are the pictures which actually made Jana very, very famous, because these photographs exposed the famine to the whole of India.
Photographer Ram Rahman takes us through the work of Sunil Jana, an Assamese who lived mostly in Calcutta. Influenced by the communist leader P.C. Joshi, Jana joined the party. But after the political split in the Communist Party, Joshi was sidelined and Jana returned to his hometown Calcutta to open his own studio. His images, though, continue to embody the distinctly Indian left tradition, especially its influence on culture.
Certainly, both his cultural work and his industrial work is extremely important. And a picture like this, which Jana made of my mother Indrani, I mean, this is Bharatanatyam, which is a classical art form, but the image that he makes of it is radically modern. The other picture I would pick is one of his industrial ones, and maybe it was in the 1950s when the big push for industrialization happened. This is just a simple photograph of slag from a steel plant being, poured down on a slag heap. But look at how he looks at it. It has a poetry, it has a beauty.
Sunil Jana died last month at the age of 95 in Berkeley, California. As a chronicler largely of the left and of subaltern histories, his legacy received far less recognition than he deserved.
The other photographers referred to her as Mummy. Now, one of the photographers gave her this nickname and it stuck. And one day when I asked her, I said, so how did you feel about that? She said, it put me on a pedestal. So she actually encouraged that. She actually welcomed that, because the moment you're Mummy to the photographers, then you're at a different level.
A Parsi woman from a middle-class Bombay family becomes India's first woman photographer, Homai Vyarawala. The story of her life as interesting as her work. Her friend and biographer Sabina Gadiok selects 2 pictures for us from Homai's vast and meticulously maintained archives. The first, a picture of Connaught Place in the heart of Lutyens, Delhi.
It was one of Homai's favorite pictures. Now, it's interesting that, very often when we look back at pictures like this, we kind of imagine that these were very innocent times. That's where I would say that one needs to look at this picture again. And I think hidden behind this image of Connaught Place is a very dark story, because Homai actually lived she's taken this photograph from just below her house. Family that lived below was a Muslim family. They owned a furniture shop. And during the partition, during the time when, the partition riots were happening, Connaught Place was very badly affected.
Homai and her husband tried to look after their neighbor's home.
Despite that, there were Hindu, families in the neighborhood that would actually throw burning rags into the shop. It was full of furniture so that they could set it on fire. So that's this picture. And it's a picture of leaders putting up their hands. It's a meeting that was held on June 14th, where members of the Congress Working Committee put up their hands to ratify the 3rd June plan, which was the plan to partition India. And I want to read out to you what she says about the meeting in my book. She says, "I felt absolutely disappointed about partition. They were in a hurry to take power into their own hands. And if you see my pictures of the final meeting, there were just a few people there. When they said raise hands for partition, there were very few. India is so big, they should have taken the consensus of people, but they didn't do that." I think the most important thing was the sense of dignity that came with being a press photographer. She was very, very invested in the idea of dignity. Nehru's reign as Prime Minister is over. For her, there's a certain kind of breakdown of values. In my film, she says that I once heard an ambassador saying, please kick these bloody photographers out, because people have been drinking. And she says, that's the end of photography for me, because I will not be with people who are undignified like in this kind of a crowd. I will not photograph.
Photographer Pablo Bartholomew has an interesting framework for the 3 photojournalists. He calls Kulwant Roy the nationalist, Homai a royalist, and Sunil Jana a communist. But what's interesting is that all 3, who come from such different traditions, had some recurring motifs in their work. The most obvious and striking is the reverence and adoration with which they shot the political figures of the time. The other recurring motif, the celebratory way in which mega projects were shot, whether by Sunil Jana or by Kulwant Roy, whose near mystical images of the Bhakra Nangal Dam gave visual meaning to the phrases temples of modern India. Today, big dams are a topic of frenzied debate. These pictures of the tribals of Chittagong by Sunil Jana would raise both debate and eyebrows. But that was a time of greater idealism and of less journalistic cynicism. A moving example of this lies in some of the images of D.N. Handa, the first head of the photo division of the Press Information Bureau. Sabina is his granddaughter. She grew up with photo albums which had pictures of political icons.
I think there was something very interesting in the fact that their family albums somewhere domesticated all these other pictures, iconic pictures of the nation that he had taken, or of, important events or important people, and they were put in the album almost as if they were kind of part of the family album. So there are two pictures I want to talk about. It's a beautiful picture taken by my grandfather in Mashobra, Simla. The Mountbatten family. There's Lord Mountbatten, there's his wife Edwina, there's Pamela sitting at the back, and there's Nehru, almost like a little family outing. There are these pictures. There are also some slightly more intimate pictures where you have, Nehru in his swimming trunks, Edwina in her swimming costume. The reason why I think it's important to kind of signpost a picture like this, my grandfather put these in our family album. He domesticated them, but he never showed them publicly. So these pictures were never shown publicly. And I think it also speaks about those times where there was a kind of a clear separation between the public and the private world. The second picture I think is quite an incredible picture because it's all the 5 siblings, my mother, her 2 brothers and her other 2 sisters sitting around holding a newspaper saying Mahatma Gandhi assassinated. And my grandfather has actually made them pose with that newspaper. And he's done this many times, with newspaper headlines. I think it's a very interesting way of bringing together a private history and a public history. So he's kind of bringing a larger history of the nation into the private domain.
By the end of the 60s, the age of innocence was over, and so was the idealism from the photographer's gaze. For the next generation of photos, the watershed moment would be the Bangladesh War, told through the photos of Kishore Parekh. Kishore Parekh would set the stage for an explosion of photojournalism that followed. Famed photographer Raghu Rai drives the narrative of India under Indira Gandhi. So what 2 images does an iconic photographer like Rai choose?
2 pictures are too little, but you can see one of this. This is one of my favorites and an important image where you can see all these senior congressmen standing and waiting. Mrs. Gandhi is taking her decision. So the picture speaks for itself. And also let me tell you one thing which is very important. Every archival picture of great leaders or great monuments or great situations cannot be a great image unless you capture the vision of things. And of course I would like to talk about 2 great ladies of 20th century. One was Indira Gandhi, other was Mother Teresa. And I was lucky enough to meet her. I met her when she was hardly known. That was in 1970. So I have done almost 3 books on Mother Teresa, the greatest influence and love of my life.
The one that they've been asking me.
Pablo Bartholomew, another star of photojournalism in the 80s, was associated with photo agency Gamma for 20 years, covering India's critical turning points. The 2 images he picks out for us.
Well, I mean, there are at least half a dozen, but if I was to sort of just play it out of what has run in the magazines, unfortunately, both are images of death. One is of the unknown child from Bhopal, and part of it is because it won the award, so it became acclaimed and has become the icon for the Bhopal gas tragedy. But it brings a lot of sadness how people still suffer. The image, while it's an icon, really hasn't been able to propel, enough within people here or internationally to get something to happen.
The image does act as a constant reminder of a tragedy which continues for hundreds of people even today. It's an image that has multiple versions, one by Raghu Rai, another by Dilip Mehta, who was with Contact Press at the time. A sign of how international photo agencies had the best Indian photographers covering the nation for them. Pablo's second image is a rare, quiet moment he got at the death of Mother Teresa in 1997.
And it's a quiet moment, and I was very lucky to be witness to it again as one of the first photographers that entered the room.
National events blend with personal experience for both the photographer and often the viewer. In his book India, the Definitive Images, Prashant Panjwar explores the wider question of a nation remembered through its images.
The idea was that to do a book of the most memorable images of India, which I reinterpreted as being what are the images that are in the public memory of India. And by investigating that, maybe one could sort of come to an understanding of how we see ourselves and our history.
One of his 2 pics is an image he says he shot quite by accident at the Hindon Air Base in 1997. After a photo op with a para-jumper was over and the other journalists had left, Prashant got this moment of serendipity.
Wind blowing and they were trying to fold the flag, and that's when, you know, all this beautiful action, the flag was flying all over the place, and I made this image at that time. Even at that moment in my head, I also was the picture editor of Outlook. I knew that was a very, very important image because 1997, 50 years of India's independence, we went that year. I'd already been working on a series of special issues, and I just knew that this was the image that was going to be the image that we'll use. This is an image of Kunti Devi, a 14-year-old child widow whose husband was killed in the Shankar Bigha massacre by upper caste landlords. 22 people killed. For me, in the given time that we're talking, and we're talking in 2012, I don't think the actual news event itself has that much value now. I mean, and the fact that, you know, it's important, it's very important. But as a photojournalist, you know, it's my work to go beyond that also.
Sandeep Shankar is another veteran of the same era.
Well, you know, there are these 2 pictures which I always somehow remember. It's the first picture taken inside the Golden Temple complex after Operation Blue Star. This was 2 days after the premises was opened to visitors, not photographers and journalists. I went in and I saw the kind of destruction that had happened. I managed to take this little camera inside, and I took a couple of blind shots and I just came out. I was scared like hell because there was so much of army and security forces inside. Second one was after the Accord, Sri Lanka Accord, Rajiv Gandhi had gone to Colombo. He was given a guard of honor when one of the soldiers hit him with the butt of his gun. And I just clicked some 7-8 frames right there. Actually, in these moments, a lot of things happen, and you don't see these intricacies, but you know what is, you know, some moment in the frame which you've captured.
In some ways, the 80s and the early 90s was the high noon of Indian photojournalism. But as the media grew and fragmented in a post-liberalized India, marked by a rise of television, that era of legendary photographers and the iconic image waned.
Even lot of editors, I see, they don't have value for photographs. The photography also become totally, you know, we have been sort of dictated by the forces to shoot from here only, and you cannot go more than 5 minutes. तो वो चाम खत्म हो चुका जो हमने देखा आने वाले टाइम में किसी फोटोग्राफर कैमरामैन को नहीं मिलने.
Pramod Pushkarna says today he shoots more out of an addiction to news adrenaline. For 3 decades, the prominent pictures that came out of Bihar often had the signature KMK, Kishan Murari Kishan. But when he picks out his iconic picture, it's of an earlier time, of the Bhagalpur blindings.
लाइट भी कम था, बिना फ्लैश का खींचना था, तो हमने करकरा के जितना भी फोटोग्राफ है हमने खींच लिया. पीछे से जेल का जो सिपाही है वो हमें गर्दन पकड़ा, बोला कि आपको तो मना किया था, यहाँ जेल फोटोग्राफी अलाउ नहीं है, आप कैमरा खोल के क्यों बैठे हुए हैं, क्यों खींच रहे हैं. हम तो इधर ऐसे देख रहे थे.
এটা পুরো হাই ডিগনিটি মানে ফরেন ডিগনিটিজে মিটিং হচ্ছিল ভেতরে, সেইখানে ভেতরে যখন মিটিং হচ্ছে আমাদের তো ভেতরে ঢুকতে নেই, আমাদের বাইরে বার করে দিয়েছে. তো তখন এরা সব নিয়ে যাচ্ছে ড্রিঙ্কস, সেই সময়টা চলছে.
Shipra Das says she can never leave a field she struggled to get into. Half a century after Homai, a woman photographer is still a rarity, especially in political news.
ইন্ডিয়া টুডে আমি এত পলিটিক্সের ছবি দিয়ে এসেছি, মানে সমস্ত স্টক আছে, মানে আমি চলে এসেছি, এখনো আমার ছবি ছাপা হচ্ছে কন্টিনিউয়াসলি।
Every now and then, a photojournalistic image still manages to cut through the clutter and convey a moment more powerfully than any moving image. We end with these images shot by veteran photojournalist R.K. Datta of the tsunami and the Gujarat riots. Images that remind us the power of a photograph to freeze a minute part of reality.